Alright, Prospero's themes in the Tempest. Much of the action in The Tempest is based on familial relationships. Before the time of the play, there are Antonio and Prospero, brothers broken apart by jealousy and lust for power, so that Antonio is willing to leave his brother and niece to perish at sea and never shows remorse upon learning they're alive. Prospero reacts with a desire for revenge against his mutinous and murderous brother, but while he shipwrecks Antonio, he does so in a way that means his brother is never at real risk. Despite all this, Prospero in the end grudgingly forgives Antonio despite the latter's silence, saying, "The rarer action is, in virtue than in vengeance, they being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose doth extend, not a frown further." Through the influence of Antonio, and reflecting the other man's greed, Sebastian is motivated to murder his own brother to obtain control and power. While in both cases the relationships of siblings are poisoned by greed and jealousy, other familiar relationships in the play are more positive. Prospero is very protective of his daughter, Miranda, and mourns for all she has lost in their exile to the island. He plans for her future by arranging for her to marry Ferdinand, gaining her political power and financial security that were lost when he was dethroned. He also ensures that Ferdinand's love for Miranda is true by making him work for her. Prospero's love for Miranda is what gives him humanity, and in turn she adores him, despite his controlling tendencies. Theirs is a strict but adoring parent-child relationship. As shown in his address to her, "Awake, dear heart, awake. Thou hast slept well, awake." Likewise, whilst Alonso is separated from his son, who he fears dead, he experiences guilt and regret for traveling to his daughter's wedding, blaming himself for the loss of his heir. "Therefore my son in the ooze is bedded, and I'll seek him deeper than e'er plummet sounded, and with him there lie mudded." Ferdinand likewise mourns when he believes his father dead, despite the kingship he stands to gain, a counterpoint to the greed of his uncle and Antonio. When they each discover the other is alive, they are overjoyed, and Alonso doesn't even protest the sudden marriage with Miranda. In the play's sole created, as opposed to born, family relationship, the marriage of Miranda and Ferdinand, they are in love at first sight, with Prospero placing trials in their way to ensure that their love is genuine, despite his initial assessment that they are both in either's powers. They experience the least conflict of any of the play's familiar interactions. It is also important to note the lack of women in this play. Without maternal influence, the schema of family may seem incomplete, yet one of the play's central ideas is that human nature desires familiar connections and a sense of belonging. The plot of the play is instigated by betrayal and revenge, paralleling the themes of servitude and freedom. Almost all betrayal in The Tempest comes from a feeling of injustice or a desire for rightful power. Breaking it down by character, Antonio betrays Prospero by plotting with the King of Naples to unseat him, the first domino in a line of betrayals. But Prospero also commits a betrayal beforehand. He betrayed his country by giving control to his brother so that he could study magic. Antonio later betrays Alonso by convincing Sebastian to kill the king while he is asleep. The occasion speaks the "and my strong imagination sees a crown dropping upon thy head," before being thwarted by Ariel. Prospero betrays Caliban by ignoring his right to the island through his mother and enslaving him and treating him like an animal. Caliban then betrays Prospero by plotting with Trinculo and Stefano. "Yea, yea, my lord, I'll yield him thee asleep, where thou mayst knock a nail into his head." Some characters are seemingly innocent, such as Miranda and Gonzalo, and Ariel, who is loyal to the end of his service. However, Gonzalo serves King Alonso, who is part of the scheme to remove Prospero. If his first loyalty is to Alonso, does he betray him by going behind his back to aid Prospero and Miranda? If it is to Prospero, is the fact of his service to Alonso a betrayal? And Miranda goes to Ferdinand and promises to marry him, despite being forbidden to so much as speak to him by her father. She has no way of knowing at that point that this plays into Prospero's plans. And for all Ariel's loyalty, there is still an edge of fear between him and Prospero, based on all the conversations about his freedom, that either Prospero will betray Ariel by keeping him in service, or Ariel will do something duplicitous in pursuit of his freedom. In the end, all betrayals are forgiven and everyone goes on their merry way. But surely they all begin sleeping with one eye open after that. Prospero's interactions with many characters are influenced by his vengeful streak. The wrecking of the Neapolitan ship and the relation of his history to Miranda are both heavily influenced by these desires. While everyone is reconciled by the end, this isn't Prospero's goal at the beginning. His revenge is calculated. He has planned it for his entire 12 years on the island. But when time comes to enact it, he views both the Tempest and the later torment of his foes from afar. Even though he eventually reconciles with them, whilst they are in his power, he is sure to tell his victims why they have suffered. But remember, for that's my business to you, that you three from Milan did supplant good Prospero, exposed unto the sea, him and his innocent child, for which fell deed the powers do pronounce by me, lingering perdition worse than any death. He only reconciles after being prompted to mercy by the non-human Ariel. He is also vengeful in his regular interactions, most notably with Caliban. Prospero repeatedly threatens Caliban with cramps in return for his misdeeds, further souring the relationship between them. His interactions with Caliban also expose his tendency to negatively characterize his enemies, even to the point of hyperbole, calling him a devil, a born devil, on whose nurture can never stick. But based on all parties' descriptions of Prospero and Miranda's early time on the island, at one point, he and Miranda must have seen potential for good in Caliban. So this image is supposed to be Prospero and Alonso in his great outfit. Prospero's forgiveness is prompted by Ariel's call to mercy and Gonzalo's previous show of humanity. However, this is only after he feels that justice has been served. Without forgiveness, the eventual reconciliation is impossible. However, in light of all Prospero's manipulations throughout the play, it must be asked whether the forgiveness is genuine. He continues to cast aspersions on his allegedly former enemy's character, calling Antonio unnatural. And in the future, he could wield his forgiveness and any guilt they feel over their misdeeds to gain their subservience. And at last, reconciliation. Full reconciliation only comes through Prospero's rejection of his magic, arguably one of the things that instigated the original betrayal. He refers to his magic as rough, meaning violent or crude. Later, he states, "I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book." This is him completely letting go of his magic and returning to a more normal life in the regained Milan with his reconciled former enemies. This constitutes an acknowledgement of magic's role in his trials and of his own mistakes. Magic was the instrument of his revenge, but he has realized that he is no longer using it for good. He is letting his powers get the best of him. He is also accepting that his distraction with magic is what weakened him enough to be dethroned. Earlier, he even acknowledges that by focusing on magic, he was neglecting his duties as Duke. At the end, he rejects it to give himself the ability to go back and regain what he has lost. He recognizes his own fault and takes responsibility. Even while he intends revenge, he ensures that none of the inhabitants of the ship are killed, leaving the possibility, even then, of reconciliation. His reconciliation